The war in Ukraine has reached a turning point. 2.5 years in, Russia is no longer the unstoppable force it once claimed to be, and Ukraine, though battered and exhausted, continues to fight with resilience that the Kremlin never anticipated. But while the front lines in the Donbass may look like they're stuck in a stalemate, beneath the surface something much bigger is happening. Russia's economy is cracking, Putin's grip on power is weakening, and the balance of the entire war may soon shift in ways no one expected. At the beginning of the invasion, the world believed this would be a quick, brutal campaign. Russia would storm into Ukraine, Kyiv would fall, and the West would eventually adapt to a new reality. That's how Moscow sold the war to its people: swift, decisive, inevitable. But the reality on the ground turned out to be very different. Ukraine dug in. The West responded with sanctions, weapons, and diplomatic support, and slowly but surely, the war stretched into a grinding battle of attrition. Today, Russia's economy is bleeding. The sanctions that were supposed to be symbolic at first are now starting to bite hard. Inflation is rising, industries are shrinking, and ordinary Russians are beginning to feel the pain in their daily lives. For many families, life is becoming more difficult every single month, and the longer the war drags on, the worse it gets. Yet none of this has been enough to convince Vladimir Putin to back down. He still clings to the fantasy of a grand Russian empire restored by force. But here's the twist. While Russia is struggling, Ukraine isn't backing off either. If anything, Kyiv has doubled down. Its forces are still entrenched along the front lines, weathering relentless waves of Russian assaults. They continue to shoot down swarms of drones and intercept missiles aimed at their cities. And beyond defense, Ukraine has begun striking deeper and deeper into Russian territory itself. Think about that for a moment. At the start of the war, few believed Ukraine would survive. Now it's hitting targets inside Russia almost every week: airfields, fuel depots, military command centers. These are not symbolic attacks. They are strategic blows that shake the Kremlin's sense of security. Ukraine has even managed to strike Crimea repeatedly, destroying bombers, crippling infrastructure, and undermining Russia's grip on the peninsula it annexed back in 2014. Crimea is more than just a piece of land. It's the crown jewel of Putin's imperial project. Losing it would be a devastating humiliation, not just militarily but politically. It would expose the limits of Russian power and shatter the myth that Putin is the strongman who always delivers victories. That's why Kiev's strikes there are so powerful. They don't just damage runways or warehouses, they damage Putin's image inside Russia and abroad. And yet despite all of this, Zelensky has made one thing absolutely clear. Ukraine is not willing to surrender its land. Not Donbass, not Kherson, not Crimea, nothing. For Ukraine, this is an existential fight for survival, and giving up territory would mean rewarding aggression. That uncompromising stance makes peace talks almost impossible under the current conditions. Russia demands recognition of its gains, Ukraine demands total restoration of its borders. The result? Deadlock. So where does this leave the war? On the surface, stuck in a stalemate. Neither side able to land a knockout blow, neither side willing to compromise. But in reality, this deadlock is incredibly dangerous, for both nations and for the world. A frozen conflict means endless bloodshed with no resolution. It means more families torn apart, more towns destroyed, and more instability spreading across Europe. History gives us examples of what happens in these situations. Think about the Korean War, which ended not with peace, but with an armistice that left the peninsula divided for decades. Or the Soviet War in Afghanistan, which dragged on until the cost, both financial and human, became unbearable. Russia today faces a similar risk, being trapped in a war it cannot win, but also cannot afford to lose. And here's what they don't tell you. The longer this war lasts, the more vulnerable Russia becomes, not just on the battlefield, but at home. Inside the Kremlin, there are already signs of internal power struggles. The rivalry between the military and the intelligence services is growing. Corruption scandals are surfacing. Ordinary Russians are losing trust in the promises of state propaganda. Putin may still project strength, but behind the curtain, his system is starting to fracture. This is why some Ukrainians argue that Europe needs to step up its pressure. For them, sanctions are not just about punishing Russia, they're about forcing the Kremlin to make choices it cannot sustain. Cut off more of its oil revenues, restrict its access to technology, squeeze its oligarchs until the elite itself begins to question whether this war is worth the cost. The idea is simple. If the battlefield can't deliver a decisive victory, maybe the economy can. But of course, there's a risk. If Russia feels cornered, will it lash out even harder? Will Putin escalate using even more brutal tactics to compensate for his losses? And how long can Ukraine itself endure this level of destruction without breaking? These are the questions Western leaders are wrestling with, and they don't have easy answers. Still, one thing is undeniable: Ukraine has changed the narrative. Far from being a victim that would fold in weeks, it has become a symbol of defiance. Its strikes inside Russia show that Moscow is not untouchable. Its survival proves that a smaller nation, with enough determination and support, can hold its ground against a supposed superpower. That lesson alone is reshaping global politics. Other countries are watching closely, from Taiwan to Eastern Europe, because the outcome in Ukraine will echo far beyond its borders. And let's not forget the human cost. Every day this war drags on, ordinary people suffer the consequences. Families living under bombardment, soldiers facing unimaginable conditions, children growing up in a country at war. For them, these aren't abstract geopolitical games, they're matters of life and death. That's why finding a way to end the war is so urgent. But ending it on Putin's terms would set a dangerous precedent for the entire world. That aggression works, that borders can be redrawn by force, that might makes right. And that is something Ukraine and its allies are determined to resist. So what comes next? More battles, more strikes, more uncertainty? Ukraine will continue to fight for every inch of its land, Russia will continue to throw waves of men and machines into the meat grinder, and the world will keep watching, wondering when and how this nightmare will finally end. But here's the truth. Unless something changes, peace is not on the horizon. This war could drag on for years, grinding down both nations, destabilizing Europe and reshaping global alliances. The only question is whether the cracks forming inside Russia will eventually widen enough to force a reckoning. For now, one thing is certain: this war is far from over. And the story of Ukraine's defiance, Russia's decline, and the West's response is still being written. So what do you think? Will Ukraine's resilience and Russia's growing weaknesses eventually tip the balance? Or are we heading toward a frozen conflict that lasts for decades? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dive analysis on the world's most pressing conflicts. This is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next.